Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. We have a lot to cover today, including our backlog of videos that we're still working on, the new Scout EV and plug-in hybrid, although they're calling it something a little bit different than that. We're also going to talk about Toyota's plug-ins, the new Kia Tasman, which has a face that I think only its mother could love, but it is a brand new mid-sized truck that, maybe one day we'll get in North America.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
The first thing we should do is plug our upcoming videos because we have quite a laundry list of them to run through before now in the end of the year. And there will be more even added to this list. But upcoming, you will see on the channel Nissan Ariya, Ford Bronco Sport, Prius Prime, RAV4 Prime, 2 videos actually on the Ford Ranger, the Mazda CX-50 Hybrid. I know a lot of people have been waiting for that video. We'll talk a little bit about it in this podcast. The Mercedes E450 all-terrain wagon, sort of the luxury Subaru Outback, the Buick Encore GX, the Toyota Sienna Hybrid, the Cadillac Vistic, Wrangler versus Grenadier, sort of Yank versus Tank there, the Audi Q8 e-tron, yes, another video on the Dodge Durango Hellcat, a closer look at the Honda Prologue, the McLaren Altura, and a Rolls-Royce Spectre, also Maserati's 2-door coupe. But before we get into all of that, let's talk trucks and let's talk Scout because you ordered one.
Yeah, I got reservations down on both models. Sort of dip my toe in the water. Also, obviously, make sure I get all the emails about it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to attend, but luckily we know people who did. So we got a lot of the background information, which is still pretty minimal, but I'm excited to see more options. I mean, I don't think that's ever a bad thing. How do you feel about the Scout nameplate coming back and the fact that they're using a lot of the same names that they had previously before they got away for a few decades?
I like the concept of the Scout brand resurrection, and I think this may help Volkswagen in North America. We should talk about that connection because, you reminded me that Scout is trying to say that they are a wholly independent startup company.
That are backed by Volkswagen.
Yeah, they're not. They're 100% owned by Volkswagen. Let's be super duper clear. This is just a division of the many, many, many things that Volkswagen owns. We don't know exactly how much internally is Volkswagen, of course, but it does appear that at least the early directions of their PR department were probably, some Volkswagen connections there. The hardware, though, that's all unique.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I was curious about is, and the rumor mill is Rivian going to be involved with Scout specifically because not too long ago, a couple months, I think, Volkswagen and Rivian said, hey, we're going to be partnering, but they never really dove into what that meant. At the time, I think we talked about it briefly. I think great news for Rivian, who as a startup, as a genuine startup, can always use good partnerships. And so far, it's done them pretty well. There was no word from Scout at launch what Rivian's involvement may or may not look like, but I'll tell you two things. The interiors of those vehicles look very, very Rivian-like in the best way possible. I love those Rivian interiors, but especially the seats and the screen layout screams Rivian. So does the design of the Terra, the truck. Now, the Traveler SUV does have its own feel to it, but that truck looks very, very Rivian to me.
Yeah, apparently, from what we were told, they are not going to directly share any parts. And so the styling, I think, is sort of coincidental because I don't think they hired anybody from Rivian's styling department. But apparently they will be using Rivian's software somewhere in there. We don't know what they mean by Rivian's software, but there's probably some battery management and motor management stuff that's going on there together. They've been really, really, really unclear, which is surprising given how soon these are actually supposed to be on sale.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a little ways out. They're a 2027 release for 2028 model year, if I'm not mistaken. They're on their way. And that was the other thing, is that these have been in production. I mean, the prototype, right? They've been working on the prototypes for a while. That's why Rivian integration at this point would have been really, really quick turnaround. That's why I said the interiors for sure. I mean, the exterior design would have been there, but those look like Rivian seats to me.
They do kind of, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, it's got that same split design and the same kind of material feel to it, but that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I think they look fantastic. But what is definitely going to be different than Rivian
Hmm.
is the plug-in model, the plug-in hybrid model, which of course they're
Hmm.
calling a range extending EV.
Yeah,
And that apparently is accounting for something beyond 80% of all the pre-orders.
see, and I'm not totally surprised by that. The way I split it up is that I ordered, reserved. I reserved my Traveler SUV in full battery form, and I
Mhm.
reserved the Terra in plug-in form.
Ah, okay.
Now the thing is, on the list it says that you can switch those up at any time. Like when it's your turn, you can make a change for it. I don't expect to be in the first 10 people called, but it's one of those things where I said, I'm going to hedge my bets and see what happens. But I
Mhm.
really am curious about the range extended version. I've had conversations with Rivian about that and said, is this something you would ever look into? And as a startup, I wouldn't expect them to. But when you're looking at an adventure vehicle, understanding that
Yeah.
electric vehicles do have limitations, having an adventure model makes it a little bit tricky. And so the fact that they're going to have an extended range, generator, which they're calling the Harvester, which is great.
Yep.
Love bringing back some nameplates that sort of make sense at the very least. Ram did it with Ram Charger. Excited to see what it looks like. I'm the only downside, and I'll
Mhm.
throw it out right now. The way I look at this, and we've had these discussions, is that I don't need a vehicle with a battery range of 500 miles. I'm not that person. I'm not
Mhm.
driving 500 miles, a day. But I expect that the extended range option will only be available on the top trims with the largest battery. That's my guess, and I'm really really
Yeah.
hopeful that you can actually get the small battery with the range extender option because that feels like it'd be a better fit for me and my use.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I'm expecting to be disappointed.
Yeah, I will say I'm digging through the pile of stuff that I have here right in front of me, and I will say that they're really skimpy on the specifics.
Mhm.
Now on the backing up just a tiny little bit to the Rivian connection, I will say that under the floor it looks nothing like the Rivian because
Right.
the Rivian is sort of a if there is anything between body on frame and unibody, it would be what Rivian's doing.
Yeah.
They bolt the body and frame together, but the frame can be removed from the body, and you could drive that frame down the road. That's usually the difference between body on frame and unibody. Is that the unibody has no frame that can logically be separated, and on the Rivians you can, but
Yeah.
it's not the same as a regular body on frame vehicle where the two would be isolated from one another. It looks like the Scout is going to have more body frame isolation, and there is definitely more separation between battery and frame based on the cutaways that they've given us.
Yeah.
Um, I'll also say I'm surprised they haven't actually told us what engine the range extender will be using and anything about it at all.
Yeah, nothing at all. And on those cutouts, right, as you scroll through, they've got great animation on the website. It's a real
Mhm.
cool layout. It doesn't seem like there's any dedicated spot for those range extenders. I was
I'm
looking,
guessing
I
the
could,
front trunk.
I'm guessing, right? But they didn't. They seem to have that front end cut off pretty short, so that
Yeah.
it's not too specific on what's going on up there. And I don't know if that means decisions haven't been made ultimately yet, but I don't
Mhm.
know. We'll see. Do you think they'll go with a smaller engine turbocharged? Do you think they'll go with something a little bit bigger, sort of like Ram's doing with the V6?
I mean, it's obviously it's Volkswagen, so one would assume that the most logical thing for VW to do is just to grab one of their 2-liter engines and just stick it there under the hood with the generator transverse, make that work somehow. Although, again, who knows though, because they haven't shared any details at all.
Yeah,
I will say I am intrigued by this this direction towards these extended range EVs. They're still plug-in hybrids, guys. I have to
yeah,
tell everybody out there that sorry, Ram, your Ram Charger is a plug-in hybrid. Um, but what is interesting is that we're seeing a few of these coming out, these true serial plug-in hybrids, and that is what's unique. Is that these are true serial plug-in hybrids with no other mode. Um, and Nissan has some of those internationally, but they just announced that the reason that we are waiting so long for Nissan's plug-in hybrids to come to the US is that they finally admitted that their e-Power hybrids are not well suited to North America because of efficiency. That's actually the reason their CEO gave. He admitted that serial hybrids just not overly efficient in steady state highway travel, which Americans do far more
a lot
of
of
than they do in Europe. Obviously, Germany and the Autobahn accepted, but generally speaking, Americans do tend to travel larger distances at consistent high speeds. And that is where the extended range hybrid, plug-in hybrid, whatever you want to call a serial hybrid thing,
Yep.
that's where they really don't shine.
Right. I mean, once you run out of EV range, like, and again, we've had this too. Like, once you run out of EV range, you are absolutely sacrificing the efficiency on the motor side of things. When we
Hmm.
had that Mitsubishi Outlander, I made the trip from Washington to California, and that was not the most fuel efficient
Yeah.
vehicle out there. As soon as we hit those highways at 65, 70, that is not the best way to run it. But if you're not using it a whole lot and it simplifies the process, or you can put a smaller engine in there, it's not meant to power the whole thing.
Hmm.
That's where I'm curious to see. But it's great to see that it's happening in this way, right? We have a startup that's doing something different, but obviously it's
Hmm.
it's, it's Volkswagen. I'd love to see what can happen in a manufacturer who's already building a truck. Let's say something like a Silverado EV or a Lightning.
Hmm.
Do you think it's a whole other generation of truck before that would make its way in, or do you think there's kind of a piecemeal solution?
I'm casually curious. I will say that on the Outlander plug-in hybrid, its biggest advantage was that it had a parallel hybrid mode. So
Yeah,
on the highway, it did have the ability to try and be more efficient, quote unquote. Um,
yeah,
I would say logically, every full-size truck out there, there's an easy way to integrate a plug-in hybrid system. If you can jam a plug-in hybrid system into a Wrangler and a Grand Cherokee,
Mhm.
you can jam one into a Ram 1500 or a Ford truck. I mean, Ford's even already got a hybrid. All they have to do is stick a bigger
Right.
battery in there, and hey presto, you got yourselves a plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
I just don't know if there's political will or interest in that. I will say that a lot of manufacturers seem to have genuinely been caught off guard by the politicization of EVs, which
Yeah.
they really did not expect. I'm
Mhm.
a lot of people I think were shocked, but you and I saw this coming, and it's kind of came slowly. But in terms of product development cycles at car companies, sometimes they tend to have their head in the sand a little bit, and they're looking so far forward
Right.
that I will admit that 10 years ago they didn't see this coming,
Right.
and really nobody really saw this coming quite 10 years ago. But hey, it's here now, um, and I think part of the reason that nobody saw it coming is because previously enhanced fuel economy standards, energy independence, all of that was kind of a bipartisan thing. One
Right.
party said, we want lower emissions. The other party said, we want energy independence. That was George W.'s big thing. And
Mhm.
those two things kind of go together,
Right. They work
'cause,
on the same line.
yeah, George W. was all in on EVs and hybrids and plug-in hybrids because they reduce gasoline consumption. And the more you reduce gasoline consumption, the more likely you are to be able to satisfy your gasoline needs domestically. So if there was a
Mhm.
disruption in international shipping or oil embargoes or whatever reason there could be, right? The US
Yeah.
could be better protected against that. That's the logic at any rate. And
Right.
we don't import a lot of electricity from anywhere other than Mexico and Canada. We do import electricity, mind you, but
Yeah.
um, we're
It's
not
different.
get yeah, it's different. We're not getting our electricity from Saudi Arabia because that would be a really long cable, and
Not coming over on ships.
yeah, not quite sensible at this point in time.
Yeah.
Um, so I am intrigued to see how this goes, and that's why I'm wondering, like, I wonder how late in the process Scout decided, let's go stick an engine in there.
Well, that's part of the reason I think that we may have limited information.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess it was on the drawing board early, and they said, "Let's leave it as a maybe." If
Mm-hmm.
I were to guess, I'd say, "Let's leave it as a maybe. Keep going, keep going. Okay, this could fit there. Okay, great." I don't doubt a good integration. Obviously, Volkswagen does have plug-in hybrids in other markets. We don't see them here, so they've done this before. They do
Yep.
have an idea what they're doing. They've got the background there, but yeah, I'll tell you the thing that was the most intriguing to me in the plug-in hybrid truck world was the idea of a toolbox generator for the Ford Lightning. I think that was one of
Yeah.
an old patent application. I thought, well, that would be interesting. Not that you take
Mm-hmm.
it in and out, but just you can add
Yeah.
it to and get it from the dealership. They drop it in, they wire it, and you're all set. That would be an interesting way
Yeah.
for me to see it. But we'll see when it comes out. It'll be a couple years. Honestly, we timed out with something like the Rivian R2, so that'll be just kind of interesting to see how those pair
Mm-hmm.
up. I think these are going to be bigger. That looks like a tweener between that mid-size, full-size truck situation. But
Yeah.
but it's also heavy duty. I mean, well, it's more dedicated in what it's meant to do. Right? We have solid axles. It's got lockers. This is meant to go do things in a hardware setup instead of a software setup.
Right. I will say, on the subject of the Ford, because of the way the Lightning was designed and derived from the F-150, it would be pretty easy, I would assume, relatively speaking,
Right.
to
Right.
say jam Ford's 1.5 liter 3-cylinder under the
Mhm.
hood with a generator, because there's a lot of room under there. Rearrange
Good.
some components. That's probably doable in something along those lines. Exhaust routing is the only tricky component at that point because the battery is relatively large, but I'm sure there would be ways to get around that at some
You don't want
point.
to have a pipe just coming straight out of the hood.
Yeah, I mean, you could just go for a big rig stack or a side exhaust, a Viper or something along those lines.
You want to cross party lines. You put a plug-in hybrid with a stack coming out of the hood. I think you got yourself an interesting
Mhm.
argument there.
You could create exhaust rock sliders on the Lightning that would
Yes,
sear your legs just like the exhaust on the first generation Vipers did when
we
you got in and
love an
out.
exciting opportunity, right?
Yeah. Double duty, exhaust and off-road component. I think that could be a
Is your
win-win.
EV not exciting enough?
Yeah.
Try the new, yeah.
If your EV can't give you second-degree burns, you're doing it wrong. That should be the thing. Now, speaking of things that give things second-degree burns,
Sure.
my eyes when I saw
Mm.
the unholiness.
The
Let's
new
just
Kia
go
truck.
there. Wow. Oh my god. Um,
So, so I am a general lover of unusual trucks and trucks that may not qualify as trucks. But if it looks like a truck at all, I go, I'm probably on board. And I got to
oh, it
admit,
looks like a truck.
when I looked at the Tasman, I went, I don't know. I'm not off board. I am just not there yet. I got to see this thing in person. It's super square and rounded. I think they nailed that. I don't know if that's what people want to see, but they found a unique balance there that I guess works. It's not your thing, huh?
Does yeah, doesn't work. No. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened there. I think something was in the kimchi and
Mhm.
and people went crazy. They spiked it clearly with some shrooms or something.
Think
Um
think like a H3 that got
mm,
inflated.
yeah.
It's bulging at the edges a little bit. It's that same kind of
Yeah.
H3 truck, obviously.
It could be fixed though. Like I think that just a new bumper and I could dig it. On the other hand, I am also intrigued that there's gonna be a standard cab long bed and a
Mhm.
chassis cab commercial bed internationally. We should talk about the structure, though, because this is not a Hyundai Santa Cruz rebadged Kia
No,
style.
no.
Um, Hyundai and Kia actually have a huge portfolio of very different kinds of vehicles outside North America. We only see a tiny sliver of what this huge conglomerate produces internationally. And among the things they make internationally are things like box trucks, and full size buses and vans, etc. The whole huge portfolio of things. So they got a lot of things to pull on. And the Kia Tasman, I keep wanting to call it a Telluride. The Tasman is a brand
Oh, yeah,
new midsize body on frame design. It's actually bigger than a Ford Ranger, a little bit bigger.
yeah,
And it uses essentially Genesis engines and transmissions. It's going to use the 2.5-liter turbo, producing about 277 horsepower, something over 300 pound-feet of torque, mated to an 8-speed in-house designed automatic transmission, sending power to the back. So
right.
this drivetrain's also been borrowed out of some of the other international rear-wheel
Wow.
drive Kias,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
exist out there. Um, the interior, very, very modern Kia. I don't have a problem with the interior. It looks pretty practical. Internationally, there's also going to be a diesel engine, which of course we're not going to get in the United States.
Sadly,
And
yeah,
yeah, and that's where we should probably relay the bad news. In its current form, this is never coming to the US because it's not built in the US or
right.
North America. And that would mean it would incur a 27% tariff on imports. So sadly, this is the same reason we can't have any of the other fun trucks here.
Yeah,
The US has a peculiar tariff on imported trucks. But, Kia's not saying never. And there have been consistent rumors that Kia seems to be interested enough in the truck market in the US they may actually either modify or build a new factory for us.
It's one of those things. If you're going to build a truck, you should, I think, consider the United States. We buy a lot
Hmm.
of them. And if you're close to a border here in the United States, you may be able to see one. In a border city, one that may have
Hmm.
driven up or driven down. But um, I don't know right now. I'm in a hurry to see it here in the United States, but I like some good competition. I'm curious to see how it does globally. It's like I said, it's the first foray into a
Hmm.
consumer pickup truck for them. I don't know. Do you think we
Hmm.
could see, what we're talking about plug-in trucks? Do you think we could see a plug-in system work its way into that particular configuration?
They didn't comment about that at all. And the one thing I will say is they haven't said yet, as far as I can see here, that it's coming to Mexico. So, I'm not sure where we might see it. I'm wondering if if Kia did start selling it in Mexico, maybe as a test to see how North America feels about it. Because of course
Mm-hmm.
it could be built in Mexico and evade the tariffs. That's what a lot of companies do
Yep.
for cargo vehicles and trucks. We just, details remain to be seen. But let's hope that in a North American translation, it gains a slightly more attractive nose.
If you're gonna make it over here and you're gonna make some changes to it, that could easily be one of them.
That and should be one of them. Really,
For
let's
anyone taking notes, should be, yeah.
Yeah, Kia has recently decided that they need to really try and have their own style and their own personality. They shouldn't try and mimic things that other manufacturers have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that new dedication to self-discovery.
Mm-hmm. Risk and
But some
reward.
yeah, discuss self-discovery always a good thing. But
Mhm.
sometimes if when people are making their own clothes, sometimes the style doesn't look right. That's all I'm saying.
That's Yep, that's true.
So keep that in mind. Let's move on to one of our viewer questions. Someone had a question about the Blazer EV.
Yeah, so someone out in the Midwest, and we have talked about, there's a Blazer for everyone, and the Midwest being a point of focus here for General Motors, and the Blazer being a big part of that, Blazer Equinox, that sort of thing. But the question of, hey, out here it can get real cold, and so one of those concerns being, what for a first time electric vehicle owner, what does it look like driving an EV when it's really really cold, and how worried should one be about running out of battery range?
Yeah. And he was saying he needs 230 miles of range to complete the journey that he does regularly.
Mhm.
So there, I will say that if you're in the Detroit area or in the Michigan area there, where I believe he was, the 283 mile range Blazer is the all-wheel drive one at the moment. That
Mhm.
is only highway rated for 258 miles of highway range. And on the
Yeah.
highway range test, a decent portion of that is at relatively low speeds and you're not using the heater. So um, my recommendation is that even in fair weather states, you take that highway range figure and you cut 30% off of it for two reasons. The first one is the higher speeds and the lower efficiency you'll get at real world speeds.
Mhm.
Second one, of course, is you're going to want to air conditioner heat the cabin. It does
Right.
have a heat pump, so that is going to be
That's
relatively
a plus.
efficient.
Yep.
It's a very big plus compared to something like a Mach E, which only recently has gained a heat pump.
Yes.
We'll get on Mach E in a second here. Um, and then the third reason is because if you are going to stop to DC fast charge your EV, you're only exercising 30% of the pack. Because the recommendation is you stop to charge when you hit about 10% and you charge
Yep.
up to 80% because that's going to be your fastest window. So you're really only using 70% of the battery on those longer road trips. So, take that number, whack some miles off of it for reality, and then cut it further for that DC road tripping kind of mileage. And this applies to pretty much every EV out there. Look for the highway number, cut it down appropriately, and then use that as your sort of benchmark. Not not even necessarily whether it would work for you or not, but if you already know you want one, just to give you that 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 background in what to expect when you do decide to take it on a spin.
Yeah.
Um,
It's one of the things that, unfortunately, this is for a lot of people. Maybe not
mhm,
everyone listening, but it's still a very new technology. most folks are looking at this maybe even as a secondhand car,
Mhm.
and they haven't bought a new car in 6 or 7 years. And again, for a lot of folks, this is still very new.
Yeah.
The
I will
problem
say
is, oh, good.
with Mach-E now getting a heat pump, I will say a really good alternative to Blazer EV, I would say would be the Mach-E because it is more efficient and you
Hmm.
can get the all-wheel drive model with the bigger battery.
Yes.
Oddly, Chevy pairs the less efficient drivetrain uh, with the all-wheel drive dual motor one with the small battery. So it's kind of an odd juxtaposition. We may get more models of Blazer in the future where they pair the all-wheel drive system with the bigger battery, et cetera, but we don't have any
Couple
details
pieces.
yet.
Yeah. No, all I was going to say is that the challenge is, like you just said, take the number that you get from the government and change it because it's not going to be real world accurate,
Mhm.
and that's a real tough position to be in. No car is going to get the same EPA number, right? Like
Right.
you and I both get a Camry, we're going to end up with different numbers. So how do we know what to expect? It's less of a problem when you can fill up in 5 minutes. If you take a long trip pretty regularly, that's where you run into it. I'd say 30% is probably a lot, but not when it's cold. That for
Mhm.
sure. And that's one thing with EVs is that they're gonna run out faster when it's cold or when it's really really
Mhm.
hot. But cold's the bigger one, and it puts people in a tough spot. I really wish we had more accurate numbers from manufacturers, from government testing, so that people could be more confident in their purchase.
Yeah. What I am surprised at is that this is a whole time period thing because remember our EPA rules around fuel economy and labeling, et cetera, have been a rickety cart that keeps being added onto, cobbled together over time.
Mhm.
I'm mixing my metaphors here. Sorry, everybody, but um, this thing was never designed for EVs, and when the EPA last fiddled with the numbers and some of the rulemaking around what do we do with electric vehicles and how do we describe them, they decided to use the same fuel economy test procedures that everything else had been using to give you this EPA combined number, and then
Yeah.
they went off the deep end and chose MPG frickin' E. Like,
Mhm.
no one buys electricity in gallons equivalent. It is the most useless, stupid thing I have ever heard. And the entire origin of that was that the EPA wanted to have some methodology for comparing hydrogen, propane, natural gas, and electric vehicles, and diesel and gasoline, et cetera, together for fuel efficiency. And so they went this gallon equivalent thing, but
Yeah.
then but then diesel gets to have just diesel gallons. They don't go diesel gasoline gallon equivalents. I mean, it's all,
MBGD. Yeah.
oh my god, that would be even dumber. But one day. At any rate, so the problem I will say is that the window stickers, combined fuel efficiency, and range numbers are always going to be off in the real world
Yep.
because of how those tests are done. The EPA highway test averages 48 miles an hour because it was written at the dawn of time when we practically had horse carts and 48 miles an hour was a dream. I'm being facetious, of course. And even though they've later added some higher speed portions and they've added air conditioning, it doesn't necessarily suit the EV use profile well. A more
Right.
useful number would be how long does this go at 70 degrees Fahrenheit at 70 miles an hour level travel? At least that would give you a more realistic idea. So I will say on the EPA's fueleconomy.gov site, for most vehicles, the information for some reason is available for everybody, but for most vehicles, you can use the compare feature, hit the personalize button, and then
Mhm.
set the percentage of time you spend in stop and go traffic, which is the city portion, set that to 0, and that will give you what the EPA says the highway range number is for the vehicle.
Yeah, so it's super user friendly. Everyone knows how to do it, and it's not a pain in the ass at all.
Yeah. And sadly, the alternative is worse because what you also can do is you can take the MPGE number that's on the window sticker, which
Hmm.
you do have the range of numbers for city, highway, and combined. You
Hmm.
can take that, you can convert it to miles per kilowatt hour, and
Hmm.
then multiply that by the range so that way you can get
Right.
the number of kilowatt hours that it takes to fill the battery, because that's not your
Hmm.
battery size, that's a different number.
Hmm.
And you can then work that out with the other MPGE number to get those numbers. It's a stupid process.
And there's no reason that you should just look at the big bold number that says how far it can go, instead of do this process.
Mhm.
Like we just laid it out. It's nice and easy.
Yeah, it's it's a pain in the butt. But speaking of things that are not quite as big of a pain in the butt, you have recently spent your time in a bunch of plug-in hybrids.
Yeah, I got a few coming out here right now. I've got the Prius Prime in the driveway. Already did a trip on that one. I'll tell you what. So around my area, I have 70-mile-per-hour highways, and with all these press cars, when I take a trip, I set it to the speed limit, so 60 or 70 miles an hour, just going for the cruise. From my house out to the freeway and up, I got
Uh-oh.
36 and a half miles on that pure EV range, and that was pretty impressive because that is at 70 miles and doing some climbing.
Hmm. Yeah, I am really impressed with the Prius Prime. Part of
Mhm.
me, I have to admit, wishes that they would just stick that in another vehicle as well because it's great in the Prius Prime, but how cool would it be if we could get a Corolla Cross with that?
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I mean
sadly,
it's obviously doable. It's just
yeah,
hasn't been done.
yep. And I don't know why they won't do it.
They could do it to a lot of, well, maybe not most, but a lot of the models in their lineup could be
Yeah.
pushed over to this prime model, and I think, I mean, it would literally go far. But so far, pretty impressed. I'm enjoying that one. It's an interesting juxtaposition. I also just handed off a Nissan Aria, so going from this full electric experience to this pseudo electric experience, two very different cars, but both of them kind of making the most of the electric profile, just a
And how
different
did
way.
the Aria go? Speaking of electrics,
Yeah, you know, I've really liked the way the Aria looked, and I may mention that a couple times in the
mhm,
upcoming video. It's a really nice looking car, and I think it's going to age really really well. It's just got this subtle futuristic thing instead of like
mhm,
smacking the face futuristic, so that's definitely a plus. The best thing about it is sitting in it and
mhm.
driving it around.
It's
But
comfy.
how nice it is to the ambiance, the environment that you're in.
Mhm.
I just wish it was better for really long trips because it is not good for really long trips. Not functionally. The
Yeah.
experience, cool. The charging and getting there, a lot less cool.
So how was your charging experience?
Um, Disappointing, just ever so slightly. Uh, I made let's see, I did 450 miles total in the car, and I did two DC basically quick top offs. I didn't see over 100 kilowatts on either of those stops, and that was
Ooh,
disappointing. Luckily, I
ooh,
didn't need tons of charging, but yeah, 100 kilowatts is not fast, not in the slightest.
that's not
Um,
good.
no, no, and
Hmm,
I just leave it there. There's room for improvement, and it feels
mhm,
like kind of a day late and a dollar short, which kind of feels like what the Leaf was and is. And I just Nissan started with that Leaf, and they blazed a little trail for themselves, and they just kind
mhm.
of lost momentum. The RA has room to grow, and if it does, I think it could be a pretty competent competitor. But I enjoyed my time with it, and that's the hard thing. So if it was buy it, lease it, rent it, or ignore it altogether, I would absolutely rent it. I probably wouldn't
Mhm.
lease or buy
Yeah. This may strike you as a surprise. I don't know. Tell me how you feel about this. But
it.
apparently, the rumor mill says that the Aria was conceived of as a replacement for the Murano. So the
Oh,
actual new Murano that we're getting apparently was kind of a later thought, which is why Murano aged so long on the vine.
I mean that makes sense. The new Murano does have a lot of the same aesthetic, so
Hmm.
like this is the same vibe they're going
Yeah.
for. I think that's probably good for the Murano. Again, just trying to do something different. Actually, I just handed it off this morning. I was out for my last drive, and I went, it's really nice inside here. This almost feels like it's right on the end of a luxury experience. I'd be curious to see at what point did Nissan say we're definitely
Hmm.
not going to make this an Infinity model? Because there's a few things in there that feel like they're on the luxury end of things.
Yeah, I'm going to be intrigued to see how you feel about the Lexus RZ, which I think you have coming up at some point here soon.
Yeah, hopefully in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, so I like the Aria more than the RZ because the
Okay.
price is more right. And
Yes.
now Nissan's having a fire sale, so price is
You
even more right.
want a good deal on
Um,
an Aria?
yeah,
You
neither
want a
one
good deal on a nice car to drive? Now's a good chance.
neither one charges overly swiftly, but
No.
that's there.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another EV topic. I know everybody's gonna be like, "Why are there so many EVs on the channel?"
There's so many
Hey,
new EVs.
there are just so many new ones. And we just, we snagged a used car, and the process for snagging the used car was so painful it hurts.
Oh boy.
Or it's
That's how
it's
we're going to lead that off, huh?
it's
Okay. All
still
right. Well, thanks
it's
for tuning in,
still
everyone.
it still hurts. Is that too too much? Too much?
It's
So we
entirely
bought
all.
a used car from Hertz, everybody. Um And I was intrigued because I had received a bunch of emails, oddly enough, over the
Mhm.
last few months, mainly because of the glut of Teslas and other EVs that Hertz has shifted lately. And let me take a quick peek here and see what the inventory is currently, because this is a little segue here.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, because this kind of ties in right now. This is all actually almost scary. Right now, Hertz has 113,801 used cars for sale
That is a
in
lot
the
of cars.
US. That is a lot of cars.
Yeah.
And they have cars from every manufacturer you could possibly think of too. Um, Want to guess where the bulk of these cars coming from? What brands?
The bulk of them.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, because I want to say something domestic. I want to go with a Ford or a Chevy or a Toyota, just the general large
Yep. Yep.
volume manufacturers. But you got me thinking it's a different direction.
No, no, I mean, it's, the largest is Chevy, which I think is
Okay.
pretty rational because Chevy is, of course, a big domestic volume manufacturer, although
Yeah,
not the single largest domestic brand. So Chevy has 26,000 of these cars, so a
it is a
little bit,
big portion.
under a quarter are
Yeah.
Chevys. What was surprising, I think, is how far up this list Toyota is.
Mm-hmm.
So Chevy, 26,000 of this pie.
Mm-hmm.
Ford is 16,005.
Okay.
Next, it currently, sorry, next was Nissan. Nissan's 21,000. So
Okay.
Chevy's 26, Nissan's 21. Almost half of all the rental cars basically are
Right there.
Chevys, Nissans.
Yeah.
Then Ford at 16,000, then Toyota at 10,000.
Okay.
So a
Yeah, it's a
lot of
big chunk.
Toyotas there. Um, Also kind of funny though is that there are currently 1,800 Hondas for sale,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that a lot of Honda fans, especially some of my good friends, they are they're like, "Well, Honda doesn't have rental cars." And I'm like, "Well, they
Mhm.
do. The rental car companies just buy them through the dealers they own or whatever, because Hertz effectively has a lot of dealer ties, etc. There are actually
Yeah.
some dealers that are indirectly owned there, but um, interestingly here, there are way fewer Mitsubishis than Honda rental cars.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay.
Also, let's look down. There are more Honda rental cars available for sale than Buicks or Cadillacs. Um, Hyundai
I'm
has
expecting.
6,000. There's 6,000 Hyundais for sale.
See, I would
Um,
expect you to have a few in there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There are about the same number of rental Mazdas as rental Hondas for sale. Any rate, we did
Yeah.
not buy any of those because viewers were asking sort of coincidentally about how the process worked. Should they do it?
Hmm.
Uh, we had some questions ourselves internally around like, well, how well do some of these things hold up over time?
Yeah.
And
You
we
want a
did not,
durability test? You buy a
yeah,
rental.
and we did not want a Tesla for one simple reason, which is we've already over Tesla'd ourselves, I think. Um, and you have a Tesla currently.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also the fact that everybody else has covered the whole used Tesla thing at Hertz. So instead, we
I mean,
got a used Volvo.
I have two Tesla videos coming in the next few weeks, so
Yeah.
yeah, we got a lot of Tesla.
And I think that the Tesla Hertz thing has been overdone anyway. So what we did was got ourselves a lightly loved 20,000 mile Volvo C40, which, to be honest, I had expected to be rougher than it actually is.
Yeah, and it's in good shape.
It's in pretty good shape.
Mhm.
There are those things that you generally would worry about. Like, we talk a lot about black plastics being an abomination. You shouldn't have shiny black plastics in the interior. And
Mhm.
sure enough, the shiny black plastics, the horizontal ones in the interior that are, right there where you're going to set keys and phones and whatever, all
Yep.
scratched, right? So they do not look
Wow.
right.
So much
But
for the manufacturers.
yeah, the rest of the interior looks good. The carpet's in good condition. The seats are in good condition. I am surprised that the really like dish flat, plate flat wheels are not scratched because those look like curb rash nightmares. So not sure what
Okay.
happened there.
All right.
Unless they've all been replaced, which is totally
Entirely possible.
totally
Tires are good.
possible. Tires are okay. They have a little bit of life left in them.
Okay.
And the one thing I will say for people that are wondering about this, the paint on the outside is in good condition, but it's not in excellent condition. You can tell that it's had a lot of quick washes, a lot of
Love
automated
it.
car wash stuff.
Yeah.
Um, there's some slight scuffs in the clear coat where something brushed up against the car. Um, don't know what that was. No dents in the paintworks. The paint's all
Okay.
smooth. It doesn't look like there was any dent correction either, because you typically, if there's a decent dent that was been dent corrected, you could tell. Nothing looks repainted, so we did a pretty thorough inspection rather of
Yeah.
that.
Only
The
when you got it in person, no pictures.
Yeah. There are pictures on the website, but I will say they're not great. So Hertz tries to make this look like it's some sort of Carvana thing where you can see your ride and get the pictures, apply for financing, create your own deal online, whatever, and reserve the car and then go get it. You can even have it shipped, theoretically. In reality, that was a lot trickier because we tried to do all of that. And then the Hertz, effectively used car dealer lot was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's not working. The turnovers, whatever, lots of people are interested. And then the usual game's like, well, you better get here soon because we've had lots of interest in this here
Yeah.
used car. So I hopped on a train and I got up there, and then like 3.5 hours later, I finally was able to leave the dealer. They
Not bad.
took forever to get the price tag of the thing. They had no idea how to fill the paperwork out. I got shuttled on to the general manager, and the general manager, had not done very many corporate purchases because the company bought this car for testing. And then they filled out the deposit paperwork for the check wrong, and then the check wasn't clearing properly through their automated trade clearing thing. So I get a call for check verification, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand the problem. And so they're like, well, let's confirm the information and details. So they confirm like the bank number and the routing number and the check account number and all that and where the bank is and everything. And then they verified the amount. And I'm like, oh, no, that is not the right amount. And they're like, oh, the dude entered the amount wrong in the system then. Because then they're like, oh, yeah, we see that the scan of the check and the amount do not match. I'm like, well,
that would be why it doesn't get verified. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I called my bank, and my bank's like, that's crazy. We've never been presented with the check. So like, we know nothing about it. Check there's no pre-clearance or clearance, and nothing's happened. So that was what went down. But that was all stupid. And so continuing drama there. But now it's all done. And now we have our hands on a 21,000 mile Fjord Blue Volvo C40, which is now known as the EC40, if you want to buy one today.
Yes. I mean, and for a lot less than MSRP, right? I mean, in 1 year.
27.5.
Yeah.
So more than 50% off.
MSRP?
MSRP on this one was 64.5, 65, something around there. If you want to buy one today.
Right.
It is the mid-level trim, which does have a few quirks. Like mid-level trim means no adaptive cruise control on a $65,000 EV.
Huh.
And
it has adaptive cruise control? The base model Prius Prime in my driveway for almost half.
You know what has adaptive cruise control? A Honda Civic.
Lots of
things. And a Toyota Corolla.
Yeah.
Base model Toyota Corolla, adaptive cruise control. But yes, for some reason, this is actually quite common with the European luxury companies. A lot of European luxury cars, adaptive cruise control is optional. I have no idea why. Because
they do less long distance highway.
It has most of the hardware on board for it. My memory is a little bit sketchy on this specific model, but I believe that even the base C40s all have the radar sensor for the safety systems,
Right.
um, because I believe they all have I believe they all have the pedestrian detection and other systems that require the radar sensor. Could be wrong on that, guys. Sorry about that. But it definitely has regular autonomous emergency braking, the lane centering stuff, front and
Right.
rear parking sensors, all of that jazz. Just no adaptive cruise control.
Oh, well, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I can steal it for a little while. And adaptive cruise control is really nice when you're driving 12 to 16 hours to get it to and from a spot, especially with charging involved.
Yep. So there will be opportunities because this one is going to hang out for a longer time. So the theory here is that we will have this C40 for probably a few years, but we're going to try and put as many miles on it as possible because a lot of folks have been asking, what does this look like long term? Do the batteries age, etc. It's been a relatively cheap car, and as a rental car, it was probably charged to 100% all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
no one's doing
yeah,
battery maintenance on that thing.
hasn't seemed like it's lost really any range. It seems like it's fairly similar to what we saw when we first reviewed the C40
Mhm.
after 2 years and 20,000 miles ish. Not a lot of range, you know. It will be a lot of charging stops for you.
Yep, that's all right.
Yeah, 230 miles approximately of range. The EPA, realistically, it's about 200 real world miles of range.
Right.
You know,
Highway with a headwind. Well,
yep.
180.
It does have the optional heat pump though, so
Perfect.
that was a piece of good news.
Good.
Wasn't sure when we picked it up. Double checked. It's got it.
They didn't have that on the sheet for you, ready to go.
They
Whether it had
did
a heat
not.
pump
We
model or
did
not.
not. Yeah, did not really know which trim it was. It was confusing because it was just C40 and it had
Yeah.
the wheels from the C40 Ultimate, which at the time I did not realize was a standalone option checkbox. I thought
Okay.
maybe it is an Ultimate. It's not. So
Uh,
no matrix headlights, and no Harman Kardon audio system,
Bummer.
no adaptive cruise control.
But still a screaming deal.
Still a screaming deal. Still would do it
Yep.
again. So,
Yep.
you know,
Would do again.
would do again. We'll see. I mean, Blazer EV was pretty damn cheap for
That's
10,000 miles a year, but that's all the miles you
true.
get on it, of course.
Right. Right. Yeah. So more coming soon.
Yep. So this is going to be the hot potato EV, and
Hmm.
it's going to be passed around the office, sort of like we did with the RAV4 Hybrid a few years ago. And we're going to try and see how many miles we can put on it. So cross those fingers.
Where I live, I can put a lot of miles on a car pretty quick. So it's one of those things. We'll
Just
get
be
miles on it. Don't
charging.
worry about
Just be charging a lot. That's the only tricky part left.
it. Now, with that out of the way, we had another question from a reviewer, this time on hybrids, not EVs, right?
Yep. That is the RAV4 hybrid versus CX50 hybrid. Now, we
Okay.
can't talk about everything, of course, because I have driven the CX50 hybrid, but our lips are sealed for just a little bit longer. So we'll just discuss sort of the general questions that she had, which were mainly around reliability concerns. Should she be worried about this sort of thing? How close
Mhm.
is it to the RAV4? All of that. I'm kind of interested in this new direction of Toyota's hybrids spreading out a little bit beyond the Toyota lineup. We talked about this in a previous episode, but
Mhm.
Toyota hybrid systems are now going to be found not just in the RAV4, but also the upcoming Subaru products. Um, and in the CX50, though, it is quite literally the RAV4's plug-in hybrid system jammed into the CX50. There are
Yeah.
some things to keep in mind, though, and this would be everything that you may like or not like about a CX50 is obviously still going to be there because
Yep.
nothing else changed. They adapted this to the model, and
Powertrain's fine.
that adaptation is a little unusual
Mhm.
because the entire CX50 gets higher than before because the hybrid system from Toyota has an electric rear axle, and that
Mhm.
electric motor in the back required more room. So the solution was lift it higher off the ground. Doesn't give you more ground clearance. You actually get less ground clearance than before, but the
Yeah.
entire vehicle is higher off the ground. And it's also quite a bit heavier than the RAV4. So I'll let you draw your conclusions on performance.
Yeah.
It's just over 4,000 pounds for a CX50 hybrid.
Okay.
That's
You know,
quite
it's it,
heavy.
it's one of those things where obviously Toyota's built a very good, sturdy, reliable, productive hybrid powertrain.
Hmm.
So if it's infiltrating, if it's making its way into other manufacturers, to quote a classic Hulkism, I see that as an absolute win because you get everything you love from the CX-50, at least most of it,
Hmm.
right? If you love the style, if you love the interior, if you love the way it drives, and it feels that different than the RAV4, but you really wanted some of that fuel economy, you wanted some of that
Hmm.
reliability. Obviously, not that Mazda's unreliable. You just know, hey, Toyota is one of the best. You can put those things. It's almost like a Lego kit, right? You could say, oh, I like
Yep.
this, and I want to put this in it. Um, yeah, I'd absolutely take it, and frankly, I'd probably prefer a CX-50 over a Rav4. And if I can take the CX-50 and then plug the Rav4 powertrain into it, yeah, let's do it. Obviously, we'll compromise a little bit on
Yep.
that CX-50, but if you didn't like the compromise, you can just get the regular CX-50.
Yep. I'm a little bit torn, but we can cover some of the usuals between CX-50 and RAV4 to help, steer people in the direction they might be interested in. So bear in mind, CX-50 is going to have a smaller cargo area
Mm-hmm.
and a less usable back seat. It's also going to have less adjustable front seats. I find them personally less comfortable. Main thing to keep in mind is they're less adjustable. So if you have a family with differently sized people, you're going to have a little bit less variation available. Of course, it does have touchscreen, but the touchscreen only works when you're not moving. So the
Right.
rest of the time, you have to use the awkward control knob. You aren't going to find features like a full LCD instrument cluster in the Mazda, but you will find them in the Toyota, thanks to the recent refresh. Bigger screens, generally speaking, in the Toyota as well. You'll get a little bit more ground clearance, and importantly, you'll get a fully independent suspension in the RAV4, which is something that Mazda is not giving a lot of their inexpensive vehicles. So Mazda 3,
Right.
CX-30, CX-50 have a non-independent rear suspension. And that has a pretty big impact on not just handling ability on regular road surfaces, but if the road is less than perfect, you'll notice that the Mazda 3, the CX-30 and CX-50 all have kind of an awkward shimmy if you're on broken pavement
Yeah.
in a slight corner kind of situation. So if you're on a winding mountain road that's concrete, or you're on a concrete road surface that has the expansion joint problem, you'll notice that the rear end of the vehicle will kind of wobble around in a way that you don't see in the independent suspension competition. And I have been a little bit disappointed in that because Mazda has been a brand that's built their reputation on handling ability and handling refinement,
Right.
etc. And that's one area where CX-50 really does fall behind a lot of the competition. And it's not just the RAV4, it's honestly most of the competitors in the compact crossover market.
Yeah, I think the difficulty for me on that, like on that specific situation, is that even if they've taken a step back on their on road handling, um, it's always been of the sportier variety, right? It's always been a little bit more engaging with the road, and you get a little bit more road feel versus removed
Mhm.
from that situation. The problem is if you're getting a CX-50 over a CX-5, the CX-50 just has this more off-road feel to it, right? It's a little bit
Mhm.
more rugged. It's a little bit there's a little more plastic. I mean, it's a different vibe. But if it's not going to be any better off-road, or it's going to be worse of an off-road driving experience than you would
Mhm.
get an on-road driving experience, and it's touting itself that direction, that feels like a pretty serious mismatch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a bit of a mismatch in that way. And I am also intrigued that the CX-50 is the first one to get the Toyota hybrid system.
Not a
They
CX-5.
announced
You know?
Yeah, they announced at the launch of the CX-50 that it would get a hybrid and that it would be a partnership with Toyota. So this has been known for a while, and that's
Mhm.
why this other twist does surprise me a bit. Um, Part of the reason that Mazda says that it took so long to get the CX-50 hybrid to market was that it required some very substantial changes to the CX-50's structure in
Okay.
order to work.
Even though it's
So
been planned for a while to be integrated.
yeah, which seems a little odd that it wasn't baked in at the beginning. So it required major new engine cradle and front suspension redesign. It required a decent redesign to the rear suspension unit, but since the platform was never designed to accommodate an independent rear suspension, they couldn't make that change with the
Right.
rear motor unit. Um, the one benefit, though, is that the engine and the transmission and the rear motor unit are effectively 100% Toyota normal parts. Lots of Toyota logos are happening under the hood. So
Yeah.
long term, maintenance and long term costs are going to be basically the same logically as a RAV4 because all the same parts are there. And so availability should be very easy.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to understanding, and this is my assumption, right? having not driven it or seen all of it on paper, but I would assume that you're going to get a little bit more of a compromised powertrain experience in that CX-50, but very, very close to that of the RAV4. But again, I would be one of those folks that say, no, I like the CX-50 over the RAV4, and I would go ahead and take some of those compromises to get closer to where Mazda maybe wouldn't be able to get themselves, right? If you want that fuel efficiency, if you want the reliability, these are all going to be baked in. I see it as a benefit to all parties involved. I'd also like to see some of these collaborations elsewhere. I mean, when we've seen some really cool collaborations that have gone really well, especially in the EV world. There's a lot of parts sharing. There's a lot of, hey, while we get started. Toyota's involved in a lot of things in a lot of different areas. So the fact that we can see good things from Toyota brought to other manufacturers, let's do it.
Yeah. I will say the CX-50 is terribly pretty. I do like the look. And
it's hard to say no to. It really is.
Yeah. Even though I think it is the second least attractive Mazda currently on sale. I think the ugliest one is the Mazda 3 hatch, and that's controversial, but I don't like the hatch at all. I think it looks too funky from the rear. That's like saying it's the ugliest supermodel. So, it's still really pretty. And it's still better looking than almost everything else in the segment. It just doesn't look as good as some of the other Mazdas. And Mazda just has a really good style in a lot of their vehicles. And CX-50 just looks like some things are just not exactly right for me on the front end.
I mentioned the off-roady feel to it, right? It feels a little bit wider. It's got some haunches, and I don't know if that's the best way to have integrated it. It almost feels like it's too pronounced. I would have appreciated maybe a little bit more subtle application to it. It's not quite a Kia Tasman as far as it's here we go, but it just maybe a little bit too much for me. But that's okay. Again, it's a good looking brand, so the worst of the best is still pretty good.
The X50 hybrid gets a tiny bit more cladding, which is interesting. And apparently Mazda did this to visually account for the increased height. So the vehicle sits higher off the wheels and there's less ground clearance because everything had to get bumped up. It's a pretty significant increase in roof height difference, which is kind of interesting because the regular CX-50 has kind of a Subaru Outback-y vibe with that low and long kind of feel. And the exact same body lifted up off the ground, parked next to a regular CX-50, makes it look more CRV in a way, in proportion. You're like, now this is just high-silled.
I'd go two-tone and do a black roof, and that way you bring the whole thing down visually. That's probably the route I would have gone.
Yeah, I don't think that would have been the worst idea. Well, everybody, let us know what you would have done, and would you get a CX-50 or would you get a RAV4? Keep in mind the RAV4 is not going to be as good-looking to our eyes, as sexy-looking maybe. Good-looking in a different way, because I do like the mini truck looks on the RAV4, but it is going to be more practical, and it's going to be more fuel-efficient, and if you want a base model, it's also going to be a little bit less expensive. So let us know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and we will see all of you next week.
Happy November.
If you're looking for a new or used car to